Who don't know me, my name is Misha Hossein, and I'm the coordinator of health and well-being with the Toronto North LIP, which is Local Immigration Partnership Project based at TNO, the neighborhood organization. TNLIP is a multi-stakeholder planning table dedicated to the advancement of the newcomer community in North York and beyond. Before we begin the introduction, I would like to say the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we are situated is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. TNLIP is committed to advancing collaboration with Indigenous peoples in the work we do, specifically in the settlement sector. Through continued learning and engagement, we strive to build more meaningful partnerships between Indigenous and newcomer communities for generations to come. To those of you who are here, this is such an important topic that touches many hearts and lives, which is the Canada's Caregiver Program and its impact on families. In this session, we will explore the unique challenges faced by children and youth whose parents work abroad as caregivers, particularly focusing on those from the Filipino community, and how these challenges impact family dynamics, mental health, and just overall the settlement. As this is a very important and sensitive topic, for the duration of the webinar, we ask that you please keep your microphones muted and use the chat to ask any questions and engage in discussions to provide respect to our speaker. At the end of the webinar, we will have a discussion portion where you will get an opportunity to engage with the speaker and ask questions relevant to today's topic. So why is this topic important? That's because the Filipino caregivers often participating in the programs like Canada's Live-in Caregiver Program, which allows them to work in Canada while their families remain in the Philippines. It provides them an opportunity to offer economic stability and a chance to provide for their families. But it also brings about significant challenges for both the families that are behind, that have remained behind, as well as the parents who are here for work. The challenges don't end with family reunification, and today we're here to educate ourselves about the unique experiences and how we as a community can support. So we have our speaker with us, Ella Tan from North York Community House. She will speak about the challenges of the Caregiver Program, the impact of separation, youth mental health, adjustment after reunification, and how we can support. So a little about Ella. Ella is the Employment and Family Support Worker from North York Community House with 10 years of experience at North York Community House, but many more years of experience prior to that. In the past 10 years, she has supported newcomers to Canada, providing direct support in the front lines while holding a position on the Advisory Council for the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, a nonprofit organization that supports caregivers and care providers and advocates for an effective social policy. She recently hosted and curated a panel discussion at the National Caregiver Summit in Ottawa to examine the vulnerability of care providers and explore policy solutions. Ella is leveraging her expertise as a co-host of a podcast called Mom Let's Talk. So if any of you have Spotify, please please search Mom Let's Talk, which is aimed at Filipino youth and mothers, fostering crucial conversations on family reunification and the challenges faced by immigrant Filipino women caregivers in their pursuit of meaningful employment. Ella was a recipient of the Quintessential Award from the Filipino Counselor General for her work dedicated to Filipino families. So as you can see, Ella is highly, highly experienced. She is a genuinely wonderful person, and we are so lucky to have her here. I would like to give the floor to Ella to educate us, provide us the information, and really engage us to participate in discussions about this very important topic, which is impacting our community, as well as many, many, many of our clients. So Ella, thank you so much for doing this workshop with us, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Misha, for that wonderful introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us today, and I'm glad that you can join us. As well as thank you to Toronto NorthLip for giving me this opportunity to share my experience as a former settlement worker and now as an employment and family support worker with North York Community House, working with caregivers and their families. Yes, and their families. So thank you so much. So let me share my presentation this morning to you. Just give me a second.
If you have any questions while Ella is presenting, please feel free to write it in the chat box. And if you have any comments or any discussion you want to engage in, use the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box myself.
I'm sorry, just give me a second, okay?
No problem, Ella. Please take your time. Tech can be such an issue with us while we host meetings. So I think we all understand the impact of tech. In the meantime, if you want to grab yourself a coffee or some water, you're welcome to do so. Would you like me to share the slides if you want, Ella?
It's okay. I have it here. Just give me a second.
Sure, no problem. Great.
Can you see it from your end?
Yes, we do, including your notes. So if you can just go on presenter view.
Okay, give me a second.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm sorry about the
No
delay.
problem. This is amazing.
Thank you so much for your patience as well. So again, so I'm going to be doing a presentation for the overview of Canada's Caregiver Program and its impact on the family reunification. And as Misha had mentioned that, we're going to be talking along with the presentation. There can be some sensitive information, and if you need support after the presentation as well, then you can contact us or Misha, the Toronto NorthLip, for additional support. And this morning, basically, I've divided my presentation into 4 topics. So give me a second. So number 1, we're going to be talking about a brief background of Canada's Caregiver Program. And just a heads up that as much as we would like to respond to questions or address questions around Caregiver Program guidelines, such as how to apply as a live-in caregiver, or as a caregiver, or if an international student is eligible to apply for this program. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that today. We might have to do a separate information session about the caregiver guidelines, as it's going to be we do have a limited time, and it's going to be a separate information, and for sure maybe we can arrange some a separate discussion on that topic. With that said, the overview of Canada's Live-in Caregiver Program is just to give us a little bit of a background on how the program has influenced the dynamic of Filipino families. So, and we're also going to be talking about the challenges caregiver face within the Caregiver Program, and also understanding Filipino youth and their the challenges they face, specifically on their mental health. Also, what are the ways and strategies we employ as a frontline worker and as an organization, North York Community House, to support the caregivers or care providers and their families? All right. So I guess before I we move on to my next slide, I just want to let you know that the Caregiver Program in Canada is over 100 years, and it has come a long way with its substantial history since its introduction to the immigration system in Canada. It started when Government of Canada invited women from the British Isles to work as a domestic helper or workers. And back then, in fact, domestic workers were given financial incentives to immigrate in Canada. And then after World War II, where there were shortage of domestic workers to support working middle class in Canada. And of course, for the common reason, such as exploitation, long hours of work, domestic workers at the time had left the profession. So Canada had invited women from the Caribbean islands to supply the shortage. And this was actually done through the Caribbean and Canadian government collaboration. So for the interest of time, my presentation will actually start at the time when caregivers, where most of the Filipino domestic workers started to immerse in the Canada's Caregiver Program, right? So thank you so much. So prior to this program, which is the Foreign Domestic Movement Program, various caregiver program had been implemented. And this program actually replaced the TAAP, or Temporary Employment Authorization Program, of which the TAAP does not actually offer permanent resident pathway for the workers, and it only offers short-term work permits, and that the workers have to go back to their own country of origin as soon as their visa had expired. All right, so at this point, I'm going to ask a volunteer to help me read the settlement requirement under this program. You can just raise your hand or jump in.
I can do it if
Any
you want.
volunteers?
Or if anyone from the audience wants to do it, any participants?
Any participant? No, there's just like around 4.
Danila?
Sorry, Ella. Yeah, thumbs up. I can do it.
Oh, thank you so much, Danila. Danila is my
problem.
coworker.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Sure. Released letter from an employer is required to move on to another job. Attend face-to-face interview with immigration officer to show educational upgrading and volunteer work. Demonstrate self-sufficiency and can communicate in English or French. And lastly, 2 years requirement as live-in caregiver.
Thank you so much, Danila.
My
So
pleasure.
please take note that it is in this program that the requirement to stay in their employer's house was introduced. And the caregiver program prior to this, which is the TAAP, does not actually require foreign domestic workers to work inside the home of their employer. And to work as a caregiver under this program is employer specific, which means an employee have to work with one employer named on their work permit. All right, so working or living outside employer's home could mean caregivers removal from Canada. And actually many caregivers were sent home during this program because of the very strict implementation of this program. So such as non-completion of the number of days or 24 months requirement, or failure to present sufficient income due to low wages, and unable to upgrade their skills and do volunteer work while working as a caregiver inside their employer's home, right? So the Foreign Domestic Movement Program was actually replaced by the Live-in Caregiver Program of 1992. So caregivers, with the support of community organization, advocated for change with regards to their conditions, the condition of their work, and of course, they were able to convince the federal government to remove the skills and upgrading, and of course, the social integration, such as volunteering, as a requirement to immigrate in Canada. So again, I guess I'm going to need another volunteer to help me read the qualifying requirements. Is there any volunteer Hopefully not Danila.
Oh, I really wanted to, but okay.
Okay, go ahead, Danila. Thank you so much.
I'm just joking. If anyone wants to, but if not, I'll do it. No problem.
Go ahead, Danila.
Okay. Required to fulfill 24 months of live-in work for a specific employer under temporary work permit. Labor market impact assessment, work permit, and employment contact. At least grade 12 education and 6 to 12 months caregiving formal training.
Thank you very much, Danila. Oh, sorry, there's another one.
Oh, proficiency in English or French.
Yes, thank you so much, Danila.
My
So
pleasure.
if you notice, I mean, for the information of everyone, the LMIA or LAMIA, as what they called, is actually a document completed by the worker, I mean, the employer, not the worker, to demonstrate that there is a need to hire foreign domestic worker outside Canada. So the assessment must prove otherwise that no Canadian worker can fulfill the job. That's why the need to advertise, like, for example, job bank as an attempt of hiring a worker inside Canada. Also, if you notice, an employment contract has been added as one of the requirements in the live-in caregiver program. This is to address supposedly the huge power imbalance in employee-employer relationship. So with caregivers having the contract, the expectation is that they can now negotiate contractual terms. But of course, we all know that an employment contract alone is not enough to prevent exploitation. Speaking of LMIA or LAMIA, I would hear, this is just my own story, and I know for sure that there are settlement workers out here who's working with caregivers, but I would hear stories from caregivers who find themselves unemployed or when there is a relationship breakdown with their previous employer. And in this situation, some employment agency as well, and employers see that a caregiver is desperate of finding new jobs so they can stay in the program, not to delay their permanent residency. So they, they don't waste time, to look for an employer. And so and a caregiver can be in a vulnerable position because some employer would ask them to pay for the LMIA, which is around $1,000. And on top of that, the caregiver has to cover the work permit, which is around $300 to $450. I'm not accurate on that, but in some cases, that's the situation. Okay. And so the LCP program was actually replaced by two caregiver stream, which is the low skill, caring for children, and high skills, caring for people with high medical needs, putting a cap of 5,500 principal applicants a year, compared to the prior caregiver program, which is 8,000 a year. All right. So again, if Danila wanted to read the qualifying requirements, you're welcome. But of course, we want another volunteer to read the qualifying requirements.
Would you like me to read them?
For sure. Thank you, Danila.
Yeah, of course. Canadian one-year post-secondary or higher educational credential or foreign educational credential equivalent to the above, an educational credential assessment, at least grade 12 education, and 1-year caregiving formal training. Canadian language benchmark level 5 for caring for children and level 7 for high medical needs.
Thank you very much, Danila. So again, to acknowledge the work of settlement organization, women's group, and other community organization and their advocacy alongside of the caregivers, the federal government abolished the live-in as a requirement under this program. So providing caregiver an occupation-specific work permit rather than the employer-specific work permit to lessen the inequalities. And basically, and in this program, there was actually a lot of confusion about this specific program. For example, I work with a lot of caregivers under this pathway and found out that they were actually not eligible for YMCA language assessment program. And so therefore, it makes them automatically not eligible to participate in any government-funded language training programs such as ESL, Link, or I know a lot of caregivers that I work with has taken advantage of the TDSB intensive English language training, but the reason for that is that the YMCA language assessment is a prerequisite to this government-funded program, right? So a lot of caregivers, as a result, they have to pay review centers, and in order for them to pass the IELTS or the TOEFL to determine their CLB level. So this is very important to them because this is a requirement when they apply for permanent residency, right? So we also have some participants who have taken assessment 5-10 times. They had to pay, reviews, and these exams are not cheap. They're actually costly. So apart from paying the review and then the exam, it's very costly. So I don't have the exact amount right now, but we also do have caregivers who until now we're not able to apply for permanent residence due to this requirement, right? So it turns out that under this pilot program, foreign national caregivers enters Canada as all other temporary foreign workers. So the program criteria has changed, and that the caregivers are not eligible for PR unless they obtain the relevant work experience and if they meet all the applicable PR requirements. So again, they thought that after obtaining temporary work permit and 2 years Canadian work experience, just like the Live-in Caregiver Program, they are automatically eligible to apply for permanent residency. So I can say that the prior Live-in Caregiver Program had clear pathway to permanent residency, as mentioned, right? So it is also at this time, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of settlement workers who, work at this time, that between 2015 and 2017, that there was a huge backlog on the application of caregiver to permanent residency. In fact, the average of PR application can take up to 5 years, or some actually become permanent residents with their families after 10 years. So, and also despite the removal in this program of live-in as a requirement under this program, there is a dependency of caregiver to their employers to obtain and provide proof of Canadian work experience needed to qualify for permanent residency. And also, of course, the increasing costs of housing and transportation compared to their wages will pursue caregiver to rather work as a live-in caregiver. And sometimes, even to work as a live-in caregiver, it's not even free. Some employers can charge $300 to $400 for board and lodging every month for the caregivers. All right, so to address the confusion in the Caregiver Program of 2014, where caregivers came to Canada and worked for families after 2 years only to find out that they are not eligible to apply for permanent residency, the short-lived interim pathway was launched between March 2019 and June 2019 to give the opportunity for caregivers to apply for permanent residency. And so in the same year, this program, which is the Caregiver Pilot Program, replaced the prior Care Pilot, all right? So I'm going to read the qualifying requirements. Canadian Language Benchmark Level 5, Post-Secondary Diploma, Certificate, Advanced Diploma of at least 1 year in Canada, or ECA, 24 months of work experience within 36 months prior to the submission of application, open work permit for spouses, common law partners, and study permit for dependent children to allow the caregiver's family to accompany them to Canada. So Under the new pilot, applicants are now assessed for their eligibility to permanent residency prior or before they begin to work in Canada. So this program is actually until June 2024. So work permit under this pilot is occupation specific and not employer specific. And also, again, to address the issue of, reunification and long wait, common laws or spouses were issued open work permit and dependent children were issued study and work permit. So work permit for adult children so they can come together in Canada, right? So also, if you notice that the program sets high expectation, obviously, because they are assessed to be eligible for permanent residence prior to coming to Canada. And it is too restrictive as it requires post-secondary diploma or certification to apply or to work as a caregiver. So as you know, in the Philippines, statistics show that in 2023, only 35% of those who graduated in high school are able to get a post-secondary diploma, and that's across gender. So at this point, we're actually seeing a drastic change in Canada's caregiver program landscape. There are less and less caregiver arriving in Canada since 2019, despite the huge shortage of caregivers or care providers in both private and nursing home. So over the years, caregiver have experienced many challenges within this program. Exploitation, some employers take advantage of the caregiver by having them work more than the number of hours specified in their contracts, and sometimes extra hours are unpaid or withheld. One example of this is when an employer decide, this is just an example based on my, experience with caregiver, hearing from their stories, right? So again, an employer would throw a party to 20, 30 visitors and caregiver having to work, having everything prepared before the visitors arrive, and that they are also in charge with food serving and cleanup until the party is over. Or maybe sometimes an employer couple decide to go on an evening dates and left the kids with the caregiver. And then, to do some homework or evening routine with the kids, and until the employer comes back from, but you don't know what time, right? Like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, who knows? And sometimes employers continue to downplay these responsibilities. Sometimes I would hear from the caregiver that, oh, it's, you're just going to be there. You're just going to sit down and watch over the kids and that's it. And those times that they're doing those responsibilities are actually unpaid. Right. So, so those are the example of how, how they've been exploited. And I've seen a lot of and read a lot of employment contract that says the caregiver's main role is taking care of a child, right? And then indicating the age of the child, whether it's infant or toddler, what age, and that and also light housekeeping. So that's indicated in the employment contract. And also these contracts are given to them prior to coming to Canada, because that's a requirement when they apply for visa and work permit, that they should have an employment contract created by their employers. But as soon as they get here, only to find out that they're actually taking care of 2, 3, 4 kids. And then also some information are not in their contract when some kids have disability, they have autism or ADHD. And a lot of caregivers who are caught unaware about this are not actually fully trained to take care of kids with disability. And so all of a sudden they become responsible of managing the entire house, groceries, cooking, budgeting, child discipline, and even, you know, sometimes confident of their female employers. And, you know, these are not light housekeeping at all. So much so that this is not also a low scale job, right? So these are just some example among many exploitation they experience, and not to mention the sexual exploitation. Fear of losing immigration status under the live-in caregiver, for example, where caregivers' work permit is tied with their employers, which made them very difficult to complain. And this is where some situation gets complicated because most of them are actually conflicted whether or not to report these abuses. So when there is an employee-employer relationship breakdown, a caregiver suddenly lost an employer, right? So caregiver has to look for an employer, or and this has to be done right away. Otherwise, she may be at risk of losing her work permit, or maybe she couldn't find an employer on time, right? So therefore, there's an average of 3 to 6 months job search, around 2 to 3 months for an employer to apply for LMIA, and then caregivers apply for work permit around 3 to 4 months. That's just an average, not true to everyone. So, and then these are just an example on how these processes can mean a significant delay to their settlement and reunification with their families, right? So if they lose an employer, so that will be, you know, a burden to the caregiver. Boundaries between work and personal life can be blurred when working at an employer's house. So they're going to be working inside their employer's house. So my prior example earlier, where caregiver is supposed to sometimes rest. I mean, not sometimes, but they're supposed to rest, you know, after long hours of work, right? So, but then some employers will ask them to do some extra errands, or, you know, sometimes even close to midnight, a caregiver would tell me that their employer would knock on the door and, you know, just to ask something that they couldn't find around the house. Or sometimes an employer will ask them, would you like to join us in a cottage for the weekend? It could be, sounds exciting, right? But, you know, we all know that the caregiver is not there to relax, and sometimes they're not paid, right? They have to take care of their kids they have to take care of the kids while the employer had to, you know, save for their vacation. Those kind of situation. Isolation is very common when you work as a caregiver. You have very limited interaction and social activities after work. And also being in isolation is especially true if for all newcomers in Canada, but 5 times more difficult if you are you know, a live-in caregiver, or you work with a family inside your employer's house, right? And with no relatives, you have to navigate and get around places by yourself, and while missing your family, your kids, and there's so much uncertainty around family situation back home. In fact, one caregiver told me that working as a caregiver is like a trap. They were like in prison. There's constant monitoring. You know, there are some houses that have cameras around, and even without camera, you know, employers sometimes can be very cruel. They follow you around, and sometimes you were, you know, criticized for doing things differently. And some, they have to take their meals inside their room. And sometimes they can only have their meals when the employers are not around, and had to deal with leftovers. So limited career advancement, we could think of 2 reasons why caregivers cannot upgrade their skills for working as a caregiver. Number 1, immigration status. I've read some work permit that specifically says that you're not allowed to take full-time courses, or you're not permitted to take full-time courses. And also, you may take courses part-time, but it has to be arranged with your employer. So those kind of things. And sometimes, you know, even if some caregivers have day offs during the weekend, they would rather look for a part-time job like cleaning or, you know, cashier, and work for that weekend so that they can, you know, send money home. So and I've also seen many employment contracts that are just the minimum wage, and yet 60 to 70% of their salary are sent home for their families due to you know, to their families, and also working long hours are also the reason why caregivers cannot upgrade their skills while working. So resulting to de-skilling and low self-esteem. And I have to tell you that even an unemployment worker, my worker on caregiver is not actually finding a job. They have a job. My work is to help them build their self-esteem and confidence after working as a caregiver, because at the end of the day, even if they do have post-secondary diploma, they're still going to ask me to look for, you know, if they can find a job, cleaning jobs, or, you know, being a nanny or something like that. So a lot of my work is really pursuing them to at least upgrade their skills, or, you know, start with their working with them on their self-confidence. And yeah, and sometimes they're most of the popular excuse that I would hear is that they are too old to do skills upgrading, but sometimes you can see that they have really potential. It's just that, you know, having been working inside the home and could really affect your self-confidence inside the home of your employer. So providing support and care for children and vulnerable people can be very emotionally taxing. When your main responsibility includes child discipline, building routine and structure, or if you do lifting, diaper change for the kids and adults, at the end of the day, without your family support to support you, or to talk, you know, to talk about your fears and your success, these, you know, will really take a lot of toll to the mental health and emotional aspect of the caregivers. So I'm just going to be showing you a map that illustrates Filipino temporary workers diaspora in general. This include agricultural workers, construction workers, but majority of these numbers are actually Filipino domestic workers. So this is from a study conducted by the CNN, and you will see where the most Filipino domestic workers en route all over the world to work and leave their families behind. So you can see Hong Kong, 7.5% from the Philippines, and also Taiwan. And so a lot of domestic workers also go to Kuwait, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So as I said earlier, about caregivers' challenge to apply for permanent residency could take up to an average of 4 to 5 years, and in some cases up to 10 years. These caregivers, prior to coming to Canada, actually spent 3 to 5 years in some part of Asia and Middle East. So this map will give us an understanding on how global migration of Filipino domestic workers somehow causing harm to their families. So sometimes, to sum it up, the years of separation between caregivers and their family could take up to 12 to 15 years. Not all caregivers, but some of them, and in fact, most of them with families who go through you know, or who's working from Hong Kong, some parts of Asia, and Middle East, right? So well, I'm a mother myself. It's really hard. I can sense that it's really, I mean, based on my experience, when my son started to go to university, it was really hard for me. I cannot imagine for a caregiver who has been away from their kids for like 10 to 12 years, and when it's about time to reunite with their families, a low-income woman of color has to start all over again in Canada as a mother and as a wife as well. Okay. So family separation leading to homesickness and loneliness and other mental health and emotional issues transcends to family reunification issues, which are also mental health issues among family members, specifically youth and mothers. So there's relationship breakdown, kids not wanting to go to school nor coming out of their room. So I have caregivers who will call me because they're very, very worried their kids no longer, they don't want to go out of their room for weeks. So as I've mentioned, a mother has to start all over again. And as we all know, that mother-child connection is something that is very, very special, right? So as a mother, you carry your child for 9 months. Infants are hardwired to rely and take cues and signal from their mothers when they're hungry, they're sad, they're frustrated, they're in pain. And even before a child can transmit these emotions, a maternal instinct is always there to respond to their child needs, right? So this is how mother and child form their bond and their relationship. And those formative years, which is 0 to 7 years old, which is very crucial to a child's life. And yet the mother's care and love was not there. So in most cases, I would say that, no one can force a child or teenager for that matter to feel love and ease to their mother after 10 years or how many years of separation. In fact, some kids would, I have this situation where some kids would tell me they don't even want to be in Canada, right? Because they want to be with their aunt or their grandmother, whom they see as their mother and who took care of them since they were babies, right? So I have this situation where some of the parents would drag their kids into our office and, can you speak to my son? Can you speak to my daughter? Because I really don't know. I don't understand. They don't talk to me. They disrespect me. And these are some, sometimes, like, even if you are with your kids, when they reach the teenage years, sometimes it's a normal situation with their family, but it's really something really much more challenging with a caregiver who have been away from her kids, because I can see that, there's a lot of feeling of animosity and anger and dislike, and they continue to hang on their own narratives of you left me, I was abused, mistreated, and you were not there, versus I sacrificed my life, my marriage, my profession for you to have the opportunity that I don't have as a kid. So those kind of, narratives that really make it difficult to bridge the gap between mother and child relationships. So also the expectation versus reality. And I guess it's a guilt response of a mother to compensate when with your child some material things and shower your kids on whatever they need, money, stuff, because you were not there physically, you were absent. So you send them money home, right? Money, whatever they want, like $200 Nike shoes, whatever.
Ella, just
Or
wanted to say a couple of comments that have
Sure.
come in the chat. One of our participants, Pinky's, mentioned that it's as if when strangers reunite. And another participant, Perlita, said that as soon as the children arrive in Canada, they want to go home. So they want to go back home. So just wanted to share some comments so if you can,
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Pinky, and other comments. It's very true. So though, as I've said, some kids don't want to be here. Not all the kids, but they don't want to be here because they're uprooted from their culture, their families, that, people that they treated as a family, right? But Also, on the other hand, mother has a very good, intention. For her, it's a good intent, but in a long run, it does have a very long-lasting effect to the child when you're just, oh, our visa, or, our visa has been approved, you have to be here at this time. Otherwise, we're going to lose that visa, you're going to lose that opportunity. And so there's a lot of that kind of exchanges. And also going back to my example, you spend a lot of money when you're here in Canada and stuff that, expensive. And when it's time for reunification, those material things a mother can no longer afford, right? So there's a lot of resentment building up towards the mother from a child, because, this is not what I expected. Because when I'm expecting that when I'm in Canada, I thought that we're well off and then we can afford everything. And then they see their mother like, okay, we're going to continue the discussion. These challenges puts a caregiver into a vulnerable position in compromising her mental health and physical need, as well as her children. So this illustration show that why a caregiver cannot even afford to form a bond and relationship with their kids, right? I'm not saying all caregivers, but in some cases, yes, because they have to work 3 different jobs. There is up until now, there is an article on April 30th from CTV, News City or something like that. City News, an article about Hustle Queen. She has 3 different jobs, but she was a former caregiver. And up till now, 70 years in Canada, she's still working 3 different jobs with no savings, in debt, and even more than, and even if they're already out of the caregiver program. So when the kids arrive in Canada, some of the mothers will only take off from work at least 1 week, mostly to apply for child tax benefits and OHIP or SIN number. And after that, the kids are on their own. And sometimes even some employers won't allow this mother to take day off, because, the number one response is going to take care of my kids, right? I have to work in order for me to pay you. So those kind of conversation with our employers. So, and so mom has to work for everyone to survive and keep paying on the credit card debt, even at least at the minimum. So this illustration is not, not true to everyone, but this is based on how I work with the caregivers providing financial literacy. Although it is a very hard conversation to be with a caregiver about their finances, and sometimes they don't even want to talk about it because it can cause anxiety on their end, right? But those who are willing to open up because they can no longer, so there's no one there to talk about their situation. So for example, and this is just an estimated expenses for family of 3, visa, an immigration application. So 5,000, this is not even the exact amount. It could be more, right? I'm not saying it's less, because especially if you're living in the Philippines, out of province, you have to tell your family to come to the city where, to process all the application for visa, passport, everything. You have to, pay for the hotel accommodation, food, transportation, and etc. and everything, right? So come the reunification, a mother has to purchase airfare for herself, round trip, purchase ticket for her kids, around 10,000. And I'm saying that, and others, because when she goes home, she has to pay the family that took care of her kids, right? And, if your mom is sick, a caregiver feels responsible to contribute for that, for hospitalization or something. Housing. Things change with caregivers when their families are here. They have to look for at least 2-bedroom apartment for their kids. And you know how the average, like 2,500 1 month advance, and, and 1 month deposit. So that would be like 5,000. Just an estimate, right? Miscellaneous expense, housing, bills. They had to TTC for the kids and for all the family members. Phone bills, kids has to have a phone because she's a mother has to work right away after, and so she has to provide this phone in order to monitor their kids. So clothing and groceries and etc. Right? So we're seeing here of credit card debts that people are not talking about it. This is not about this is not from any research, but this is based on my conversation with the mothers who have an average of credit card debt of 33,000 or 30,000. And you can imagine how this affects their emotional and how this situation, contribute to their emotional.
Stress response and just overall stress.
Yes. Thank you, Misha. Okay. So, again, I think I've mentioned about, the challenges Filipino youth under the Caregiver Program, such as, emotional and mental health challenges, cultural and language barrier, stigma and discrimination. A lot of some parents would tell me, oh, because, my kids no longer wanted to school because, some people would see that, oh, you don't really care about your education, right? You don't want to go to school. You don't want to do your homework. Oh, Filipino kids are like that. So those kind of comments, sometimes, kids don't want to go to school, right? And other than that, their mental health challenges once they arrive in Canada. Financial stability, sometimes kids 17 and above, they hold off their education because they need to contribute to the family's financial situation, right? So they start to work at an early age. And sometimes when they start to work, sometimes they don't have motivation to go back to school. And there's very limited parental involvement because, as I've said, a mother has to work right away. As soon as they arrive in Canada, they thought that they're going to be spending more time with their mom. That's not the case. The mom has to, pay bills and in order for the entire family to survive. So I've created this illustration and because in order for Filipino caregivers family or any caregiver family to integrate and settle meaningfully in Canada, we need to understand the issues around separation and family reunification. And it's very important that we also advocate for policy change. So this is interconnected. We need to advocate policy change at all levels, from federal, provincial, and municipal level, right? So separation can result to relationship breakdown, emotional strain, reunification. When relationship building is a challenge for the entire family, caregiver as a sole breadwinner now has to take care of her children while also taking care of other children and family. And then financial constraints build up. Most of the caregivers I work with are international educated nurses, and a lot of times when they work as a caregiver, safe practice expires, right? So, and when they apply for credential accreditation, it's no longer, it had to do their safe practice. And sometimes they lost motivation to even submit all those requirements because it's going to take a lot of time and also it's costly, right? Sorry. And also their children, on the other hand, especially youth, had to deal with adjustment in Canadian educational system, language and cultural barriers, and unfortunately, there's a lack of resources for support. And I understand that, some of these kids are, because their parents are not there back home. So no one's there to provide support and motivation to go to school. And some even are not in school. Even if the requirement of coming here to Canada, that the kids has to continually be in school. They're just being in school because of that requirement, but they're not really taking seriously about their education, right? They're just being around everywhere, somewhere with their friends. So unfortunately, when they come to Canada, they have to adjust the new education system. and also the language and cultural barriers, right? So, and lastly, we need policy change to address all these issues with regard to caregiver programs, especially the lengthy processing time, and also the restriction of post-secondary diploma requirement. And also in terms of labor policy, better working condition, and of course their salary compensation is very, very important aspect. So what are the strategies that we employ to confront these challenges? We, as a settlement worker, we organize trainings and information session for caregivers, so they have resources they need in order to understand their situation. We also provide financial literacy workshops, skills upgrading, and etc., and other things. But we also encourage, we need to encourage all system workers to continue this kind of training as an ongoing trainings. It's not just a one-time training, especially also the schools, because this is an ongoing crisis for everyone involved, not only for families of caregivers, but those people who are working with the caregivers and their children. Just like the Toronto NorthLip, they're organizing education among its member and it's right. So I'm sorry, I just forgot to. So also we need to make sure we need to make employers accountable. As you know, that it's not easy and it's not also a convenient path for the caregiver to take when it comes to labor dispute and grievances. Obviously, they don't have time for this, right? They don't want to go to court litigation. So initially, when they come to us, we provide support to caregivers, informing them about their rights, and then supporting them with writing documentation about the incident, what happened, what did you do, and then what are the responses. All those documentation process, because it's much easier for them once we refer them for legal assistance. They already knew what to say, and it doesn't take time. And then helping them with the journal. And I'm sorry, I'm just talking fast because I'm aware of the time. But if you're a caregiver living in your employer's house, it's not your house, it's your employer's house. They can just barge into your room and look for your, personal items there, whatever. So we teach them with, when you make journals about the incident, about the abuses, you have to email it to yourself. Write an email it to yourself. And then that's when we refer them to a community legal support. Just, they support them. Usually I would refer them to Parkdale Legal Services because they have no catchment area and are very, very expert in helping live-in caregivers and their immigration situation. So they help with the demand letter, or so they negotiate and mediate with a caregiver's and employer situation, right? So we at North Year Community House continue build community support and collaborate with other organizations. We are not in competition. When it comes to support, we provide with our clients. So building connection with the government institution in Toronto, Philippine Consulate, Migrant Workers Office, and Migrant Work Action Center. Those are different institutions, but we're working with them, and also we work with Kababayan Community Center, churches, could be Catholic Church or Filipino Seventh-day Adventist Church. Filipinos are devoted Christian, and part of their resilience are actually deeply rooted in their faith and strong devotions. That's why we continue to work with churches and wherever we find Filipino groups. Okay, so childcare and support, we continuously advocate for childcare and family support by communicating with the City of Toronto, childcare programs, and application for recreational activities with the kids. And we're also willing to sit down to work with multidisciplinary team at school if there's a need to support Filipino caregiver families, right? And all this actually are not enough if you do not participate in the advocacy for policy change. So we advocate for higher minimum wage and continues to indicate as a settlement worker in our report the challenges caregiver face because it's our obligation, right? So last year, with the support of my organization, which is North Year Community House, together with the caregivers, share their lived experiences in the caregiver program, and we were able to participate in a national summit in Ottawa, spearheaded by the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, or CCCE, to help create an action for national caregiving strategy that will address strategies that will address the family caregivers and paid caregivers or care providers, which this is the caregivers that we're talking about, because there's two caregivers, right? The family caregivers taking care of their own families without pay, and also paid caregivers, which is the care providers, caregiver, PSWs, and everything, including. So this includes better working condition, mental health support, increased compensation and benefits, and sectoral coordination. And as a result, National Caregiving Strategy Committee is already in the works in the federal level. So in 2019, we collaborated with Inward Forward to collect data from the caregivers and their families with the aim of creating better social support and try out new methods and approaches to support Filipino family through the data collected. And as a result, we were able to start a podcast entitled Mom, Let's Talk, to openly discuss and encourage caregivers and youth to share their experiences and caregiver program, family separation and family reunification, with the aim of bridging the gap between children and parents. And also, as Misha said and mentioned, we encourage schools and other organizations to use the podcast as a platform, as a way of raising awareness about the caregiver situation. And this podcast, actually, you can hear more stories about the caregivers and their experiences. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much. If there's a need, for additional information about the presentation, the caregiver program, please feel free to request the following links, and we'll be happy to send it to you. Once again, thank you very much for your attention and participation during this presentation. If you have some questions, we'll be happy to accommodate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ella, for sharing all the information with us. It's very important for us to know actually the history of the caregiver program, and the different stages that they have gone through in order to get to today, where they have more rights than they had previously. I want to ask you, if you can, for the people who are here working with families and youth specifically, if you can take us to like I'll share a little bit more information about the mental health from the youth and the children's perspective, like when they come to Canada and like the challenges they go through. I think like our participants would like, it would be great for them to know more about that.
Thank you so much for that question. As I've said, and also Pinky have mentioned, or others make comments about, some of the kids, when you don't want to be here or in a place where, if you don't want to be a place, some other kids actually, at least for the kids that I've talked to, they're actually experiencing some anxiety and depression, and sometimes suicidal ideation. And excuse me for this, but there are a very, very sensitive situation with the kids, and even mothers, they cannot fully concentrate their work because they're thinking that their kids are at home, and they don't want to, they don't want things happen to their kids while they're not at home. But then they don't have a choice. They have to leave their kids there by themselves, suffering with mental health. And I'm also aware that schools are actually working with a multidisciplinary team, such as school nurse. I received referrals from a school nurse, just to have a better communication with the mother and helping them understand on what the kids are going through right now, because it's really, really difficult situation between mother and kids. Like the extent of the mental health situation, because the mother also has her own mental health issue that's not being addressed, right? And the reason for that is, as I think I mentioned, because there's a lack of resources among Filipino families. You know, when you talk about your mental health situation, it's more of your emotions, and it's really hard to relate when you don't speak the language, right? So we're looking at, you know, there's lacking of resources when it comes to a psychotherapist or a social worker that speaks their language, right? And also, I guess this cannot be addressed just by, you know, settlement workers or just by school alone. It has to be multidisciplinary. And the only way for us to address this mental health issue for parents and kids is to push for policy advocacy for mental health support that's focused on this separation and family reunification.
Thank you, Ella. And in the chat box, I'm going to be sharing a link to a live document. So last year during Mental Health Awareness Month, my mental health task group and I, we had launched the North York Mental Health Resource List. There's an entire section that's specifically for youth mental health and free services that are offered to youth, and many of them are language specific. So I'm going to share the link. You can feel free to, you know, access this, share it with your organizations as well as contacts. And it's pretty comprehensive. You can use this for, you know, any clients really, or any youth that you're working with, and use it for referrals. So yeah, please do take a look. Besides that, there's been some questions about if the presentation will be shared. Yes, once this webinar is done, I will be sharing it with all the participants who had attended. And yeah, so we have some comments, and thank you, Ella, for, you know, providing additional, your thoughts on my question. So Pinky has said a few things in the chat. Pinky, would it be possible for you to share with us? You know, you've shared several thoughts, and we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm wondering which one are you referring to?
So you've mentioned a few things about youth and children, so I wanted you to specifically speak about those,
Okay.
like challenges of youth in the school system.
Yes. After this is what I learned, you know, I'm serving the caregiver clients, that after 2 years, they will not return to us until there's a problem. And most of the problems stems from the, how do you call that, the relationship at home. So obviously the lack of communication, because as in Ella's presentation, you can tell that the parents who are indebted, you know, had to pay a lot of bills, rent, and other things, had to work like 3 or more jobs. So in the end, what happened here is that the children are not motivated to perform well in school, and most of these kids honestly are I would say smart kids. They've been, like, you know, awarded so many, what they call, awards academically, even in sports in the Philippines. And when they arrive here in Canada, some of them try, but a lot of the children that I saw, they were not, because of this situation at home, and also because they don't have any relatives here, the support of relatives. So the mothers, most of them are single parents, would just allow the children to stay with their titas, or actually they're not related to them by blood, but they call them titas or auntie. And that's when they were sharing with me that abuse happens, because they felt like they are there to be the caregivers of younger kids, or even like their maid at home. And the worst part was I actually had clients who had, sorry, become emotional about this. I had clients whose children were sexually abused, and it's not acceptable. And I felt so bad, because most of the time when you're trying to help them navigate the system, help them, the caregivers or the parents actually deny everything. That's why most of these children doesn't want to go to school anymore. And then when I tried to connect them with the school, I had some successes, but definitely a lot of them failed because I can tell that there's a discrimination and racism in play with many of those conversations. And that's something that a lot of the parents or the caregivers are telling me. I thought we are here in Canada, no racism, it's equal for everyone, and yet we are facing this, we're facing that. So it's kind of like difficult because I reflected a lot about that, because as a mother too, who's raising child who is raised and born here and also experiencing the same thing in school, it's I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's like even if I tried so hard to provide them all the answers, all the resources, still it's just some, I think, authorities in school are not, they're not supposed to be working with children. And
Thank you,
that's the reality, yeah.
Thank you, Pinky, for sharing. Ella, would you like to comment on that? Or if anyone else that's working with caregivers want to share anything, please feel free to raise your hand.
Yes. Thank you so much, Pinky. And I know, this is when settlement workers really need support, because hearing stories from the caregivers, it's you will get secondary trauma.
Vicarious trauma.
Vicarious trauma just by listening those stories. They're there to help you support with, a file for income tax return or child tax benefit, but all of a sudden they're just going to tell you stories like you're not aware. You're not informed that they're going to share these stories to you, and you don't have a choice. You have to listen to the story. So that's why a lot of organizations really have to be aware. Not only Filipino settlement worker, but all settlement workers should be provided with support and the secondary trauma that they heard and they listen, because at the end of the day they go back to their families. It reflects their behavior, their emotion towards their families, and sometimes you don't know your workers are suffering from they can't sleep at night because they keep thinking about their story, and there's really limited there's limited things that you can do about this situation. That's why I understand. And also with regards to how school treated our kids, it's because it's a reflection of the lack of understanding and education and training within the school system. I understand that they have so many work to do in the school, but it's really, really important that, again, it should be a continuous training within the school. And the only way that we can do that is to advocate for additional budget within the school system to make sure that the supports are there, right? And also, I understand for the mothers who are with the term denying that their kids are sexually abused, it's actually they can't talk about it because it's part of that is guilt towards, being away from their kids and that they didn't do anything about it. So again, mother is suffering also challenge with her own mental health issue that's not addressed. Kids also, how can she respond to this mental health issue that their kids are suffering if she's not being supported? So these are the things that we need to, and sometimes, a lot of times I feel Pinky because, I feel so restricted. I can't do anything about it because I'm only a settlement worker. But I guess with my experience now, why I'm more involved with policy change, I work with organizations who work to change the system, because the problem is within the system. There's a systemic issues and barriers that it reflects on how the way we work with the family caregivers, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ella. Would anyone else like to comment or ask any questions?
I have one question, but my question, it's not about mental health. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ella, for your informative presentation. It's good, as you said, to sort of spread awareness about mental health, which is serious and important. So thank you so much. My question is related to the post-secondary diploma, which is one of the sort of requirement for the PR applications. So when we say diploma in Canada, we are talking about either 1 year education at college or 2 years at university. So I just want to know more a little bit about Philippines and how is like sort of the educational system, because they can evaluate. So what kind of sort of certificate would be equivalent to post-secondary diploma? If you have any thoughts about it.
So I think I've mentioned that about the guidelines, but if there's anyone here who's aware about, who wants to answer the question, I understand that in the Philippines, post-secondary diploma, it's the requirement states any post-secondary diploma in the Philippines and 1 year, at least equivalent to 1 year post-secondary in Canada, right? That was the,
Yes.
and your question is, sorry, I got
Okay.
confused.
No, that's okay. So my question is that when we are talking about, because I'm not sure with the educational system in Philippines, so when we are talking about post-secondary diploma, like in Canada, it's either 1 year or 2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming this is not equivalent to high school diploma, right? If you have any thoughts about.
No, it's not. Grade 12 is equivalent to high school diploma, right? So post-secondary diploma, it doesn't matter what you have, like you're graduate of accounting, as long as you have the diploma or certification, then you can be eligible for the program. So I guess that's one reason also that, you have to go through the assessment, the educational assessment as well. If you don't have a if you don't have a 1 year post-secondary or 1 or 2 year post-secondary in Canada, your diploma will be assessed from the Philippines, will be assessed, right? So you will go through a credential accreditation for that matter.
Correct. So therefore, I'm hearing that the grade 12, it's not equivalent to post-secondary diploma. They'll
No.
need to have, for example, 1 year at college or university at Philippines so that they can assess their diploma, right?
Yeah, so you have to finish. So in the Philippines, the post-secondary diploma is like a 4-year course,
Okay, that's what I wanted
right?
to be.
Accounting or nursing or whatnot. But they've decided that those diploma is equivalent to 1 year or 2 year post-secondary education here in Canada, or the equivalents, right?
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
no problem.
Thank you, Nadine, for your question. Would anyone like to ask anything else? We have 5 more minutes remaining. Okay, well, I'll ask you, Ella. So during your podcast, Mom Let's Talk, which again is available on Spotify, and we would love if you could share that with your networks. It has a lot of very important and vital information, and as well as personal testimonials of clients that are sharing their stories, and also like workers that work with these clients. What were some of the challenges that you and your team face when you were creating these podcasts, especially when like getting clients and youth to speak?
Well, thank you for that question, Misha. A lot of times it's not easy for them to share, especially when you let them know that this is going to be used for public, consumption. Like you're going to be sharing this to public so that the public would know. Sometimes they don't want to share. And it's part of the Filipino culture. You know, that's why, you know, you can't see from their face. They're, you know, a lot of my coworker would tell me, why are they laughing all the time? Like they scream when they're happy and they seem like happy all the time, right? And you can't really see, you know, the deep inside their suffering. And sometimes that can also cause like, you know, so it's hard, like they like to share very good. Of course, a lot of us would share on Facebook a good experience about Canada and our lives here. But on the other hand, when I tell them we would share, I mean, they wanted to share with you their stories, but it has to be within the confines of between worker. And so there's a lot of, you know, information about, okay, so confidentiality agreement and why we are having this podcast and how this would help the community as well. So a lot of conversation around that, around the goal of having the podcast, and also because they don't want to be, you know, they don't want to use their real name. So in the podcast, actually, if you listen to the podcast, you will hear that we're trying to hide their names, not their real names. It's just their story. And the reason why we have this podcast, because a lot of times, when I work with mothers and caregiver mothers and also their kids, they don't really get along. Like there's no point of you know, having them have a conversation, talk to each other for so many years. They're like that. As Pinky said, it's like coming to Canada, living with the strangers, but the other stranger is telling you what to do, right? And you have to understand too that these mothers are working as a caregivers, or, you know, they take care of their employer's house, you know, make sure it's in order, neat and clean. So when their teenager kids are in the home, you know, there's a lot of conflicts, right? So because they're not being guided from when they were very small, like they just throw their things away, they don't know how to cook, you know, and all these things, like they don't know how to wash dishes. And here comes the mother. She wants to be a mother right away without developing those relationship and bonding. That's why I was trying to tell you the story, how important it is when you build that relationship with your kids. And without that, without the bond and relationship, you can't really tell the kids what to do, right? Because the kids would, you know, they feel strange, like, you know, you're living in a stranger's house, and yet she's telling you what to do exactly, right? So those are different things. So it's hard when you do the podcasts and inform them that, oh, that this is going to be shared with everyone. And the podcast is the purpose for it is that, you know, because they don't listen to each other. We offer this platform for them to at least listen to other people's story and how it affects them. And you know what, really, because mothers have very good intention. It's just like it has a different effect to their kids, right? And the lack of communication. So that's what our goal for the podcast is, to have for mothers to have a voice and for the kids to have a voice to share their own experience and maybe somehow give that understanding, right? Provide that understanding in both parties. Yeah. But and again, also the podcast, you know, we have to really explore your own skills, because that's another skill, like that's another skill set that you need to develop. Like we're not, as a settlement worker, we're not naturally communicator, or we're not used to social media. But when talking about innovation, I think this is one of the important things that we need to explore when it comes to connecting with our community, right? Because a lot of kids, and I would like to go back to, you know, to mental health. Sometimes there are behaviors of kids that are only a facade, like, you know, oh, my kids is addicted to computer. He's just staying in the room playing computer. It's actually coping mechanism about their mental health. Without that computer, there's no purpose you know, for them, their life has no purpose. So therefore, right? So they're going to question why am I here? I have to go back, or you know, and I've seen parents who have suffered from, you know, kids who are suffering from mental health issue that's not responded properly. And, you know, ultimately the kids have, you know, suicide.
Thank you. Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much for sharing. We would love to hear more from you, but we have reached our time. It's now 11:30, but I just want to say thank you so much for doing the presentation. Thank you for taking us through the journey and the history of the Canada's Caregiver Program, sharing about the challenges, sharing about, you know, like the very like a close, intimate look into the families of caregivers, the challenges that they face, the challenges of the parents, the challenges of the children, and what we can do as a community from going from, you know, advocacy, from, you know, really advocating for policy change and really trying to support the clients and their families. And, you know, I have shared in the chat box the link to the live document that contains, it has about, I think, 10 to 13 pages of mental health resources. Please, 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 we've put in with several of our, you know, service providers, you know, collaboratively created this document for your support. We would love if you would use that to, you know, refer your clients, refer these youth as well as parents to seek greater mental health support, and you know, always try to identify and have these conversations with your clients, because oftentimes what happens is we get so, when we work with clients, so focused on the work itself that sometimes we don't have the time to encourage those conversations regarding mental health and you know, families, etc. So you know, we encourage that you do so. And if you have any questions for Ella, if you could share your email in the chat box, and we'll also be sharing the presentation and Ella's email in an email, which is to come. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And, you know, we would love to help and, yeah, hear more from you. But thank you all so much. You're doing an incredible job in your own, you know, careers with supporting families of caregivers, you know, youth, Filipino community. And if you're not, we're so happy that you're here to learn and take this forward. And we really hope to see you again. One last time, Ella, thank you so much for sharing your experience, for doing the wonderful job that you do. And we're so happy and lucky to have such an experienced person like you sharing, you know, your stories and what you know and what you have learned from working with caregivers through the years. So thank you, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and have an incredible, incredible day. We look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.